This episode of the Restoration Today podcast is brought to you by Surety and AnswerForce. How much business are you missing because you're not available 24/7? Make sure every opportunity is answered after hours, on weekends, and over holidays. From first notice of loss to current customer calls, AnswerForce works with restoration companies to answer every call and keep your business growing 24/7. Search AnswerForce Restoration to find out more or visit answerforce.com. This episode is also brought to you by Surety. Don't let cash flow crunch and admin burdens stop your team from doing what they do best, building. Surety accelerates the insurance claims proceeds process by taking care of tedious work with mortgage lenders, helping restoration contractors get paid in full and get back on track for success. Visit surety.com to find out more. Hey there, thanks for checking out another episode of the Restoration Today podcast. Today we are talking about a hot topic that continues in the restoration industry. I'll give you a few hints here. It kind of seemed to die down a little bit for a little window, maybe end of 2022. And now that we're into the Q1 of 2023, we've had at least one big M&A announcement. I know that there's another one coming in the next few days. M&A is ramping back up and continuing to be strong in the industry. There was a big acquisition announcement or a big private equity announcement regarding a franchisee within Restoration One. That was really interesting about a month or so ago. And so I'm excited to be joined by JT Kraai, who is a broker in the industry. He is with Exit Strategies 360. He has worked with a number of companies on both creating their exit strategies and then going to the selling block and all of that. But he works with companies often through a span of time, not just entering at the time that people want to sell, but helping companies increase their valuation, get to the point where they are healthy and marketable and taking them to market, all of that. So JT, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you also. I wanted to do a toss out for the Q&A with JT Kraai columns that you do. I know that those are really popular and you were the first person to get those micro columns through CNR going, and hopefully we've gotten really good traction through that. So anyway, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here. I am going to toss it over to you to have you introduce yourself a little bit more and share a little bit about your background in the industry.
Well, thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. Not much more to say, actually. I have been in the space now for 15 years. I've been an advisor for north of 20, got my feet wet in it in 2007, and the industry really treated me well. Lots of good people in it, and blessed to be in it. The industry held up really well in 2007, 8, 9, and 10, and again through a pandemic. So as you stated, I work with clients for a long time, not only to get them ready to go, but to answer some key questions in advance. When they do decide to sell, I just want them to be educated, make the right decisions. Nobody should be on their selling committee other than themselves or their spouses or maybe a partner. And frankly, no advisor should be. So I just want to make sure that they're fully educated, going with the eyes wide open so the best decisions are made. There's so much at stake.
Yes, there is. Okay, so talk a little bit about the market today. We are recording this at the beginning of April, so beginning of Q2 in 2023. So what are you seeing the market doing right now or so far this year?
Well, the market's interesting. As you stated, maybe it slowed down a little bit last year, and I think it still is a little slower. There's still plenty of activity out there, believe me. Yeah. Last year was essentially a feeding frenzy. Most restoration contractors of any size have been approached multiple times. And so it's slowed from that pace, but it's still very, very active. And there's still deals happening. You know, the ATI Venturi deal is magnificent. It was a wonderful pickup for ATI. There's still a lot going on. The industry strategics, Michelle, are probably being a little bit more choosy now. They filled in demographically where they need to be. They're major demographic markets. They're now looking in the smaller auxiliary markets. Many are. I won't speak for any specifically, but in general, they're filling in now outside of those markets, looking to add on or bolt on some acquisitions and fill in where they're missing. From my seat, they've gotten a little more choosy over the last few years, which is great. You know, when everybody jumped in, they were all looking for acquisitions and asking all the right questions, but now they're sort of filling out their matrix a bit more, making sure that it's an ideal fit. So in that respect, I think it's a touch slower, but there's still plenty of activity out there. And I think coupled with that is that if you're an owner that's been looked at or chased, for lack of a better term, for the last several years, you've probably made a decision by now to either take a look or you've just backed off and realize you're not quite ready and you'll go again in the upcoming years. And there's nothing wrong with that either.
It's interesting talking to some of the bigger independent players and asking, how many times have you been approached in the last few years? And it's a lot. Like the number of conversations that they've had and the number of times they've been approached is a lot. So the market is pretty saturated with people being looked at. Is there a certain like size of company that you're finding is kind of that sweet spot that the bigger companies are looking to buy now? At first it was the bigger, like Warner's company. I'm totally anyway, in Chicago. But anyway.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But
JT Restoration.
For a while, yes.
Yeah.
And so now, is there a different size that companies are kind of looking toward now, a different sweet spot?
It's a great question, and I'll sort of give you an economist answer. They're all over the board. Okay. To be a target for an industry strategic or a private equity firm, an array of equity firms, you've got to be throwing off a certain level of adjusted EBITDA. You've got to be, the layman's terms, you got to be making enough money or they're not interested. Private equity firms, many start at 750,000 or $1 million on the low end, and many don't want to dip below $1 million. Some have $2 million minimums, some have $4 million minimums. So you've got to be of a certain size. Now, if an industry strategic is looking, they too have certain sizes, but that has everything to do with the demographic that they're in and where they're trying to fill in. So there isn't an upside to it. They can go up to 100 million or greater. Many deals are getting done right now in the $15 to $30 million range. So these are sizable companies, and in the space that we're in, that's still some rare air. There's not many companies that achieve that level of success. But even down in the $1 million of adjusted EBITDA, which means you're doing 6, 7, 8 million in sales, probably on the low side, depending on whether you're mitigation or full service. Even down into that range, there's a lot of activity.
So when you say the strategic company, you're using the term and I just blanked on what it was. But
industry strategics.
Industry strategics, thank you. What are the companies that you're talking about? If you don't have to name specifics if you don't want, but define what you mean by industry strategics.
These are the big players in the industry that are looking to expand. These are the ATIs of the world, and First Onsite and Cotton and Belfor and BMS Cat, and you just go right down the list, right? Blue Sky, they're all looking to do the same thing, which is why it's particularly competitive out there right now. Those are what I'm referring to as industry strategics.
Okay. So what role is PE play? You mentioned a little bit about PE and the size that they're going for. What role is PE playing in the industry now? I know we have the big players that are buying people up, but is PE still super interested in playing a big role? And then we can kind of edge into the franchise space. But overall, where does PE stand right now?
They are. It's a good question. I think over the last 3-4 years, Michelle, the PE firms in general have driven up the prices a little bit, for good, bad, or indifferent. They have realized that this is a very safe space to park money. Very rarely can a private equity firm place funds or invest in recession-resistant or recession-proof industries. Yep. So there's an attraction there, no doubt. Now, from my seat, private equity firms, they'll tend to pay a little bit more, but it comes with a cost. Sure. They're used to manufacturing and distribution and very proven business models. Yeah. When they look in the disaster restoration space and all of a sudden they're looking at large losses, cat work, essentially trying to serve a couple of masters with the insured and the carriers. There are things about it. You start talking to them about payments in 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, or a year with certain kinds of cat work, you can hear their head explode. They simply can't get their head around it. So due diligence can be a brutal process with private equity firms. The due diligence process is much smoother with industry strategics or qualified buyers. The qualified estimators, PMs, GMs, they know exactly what they're looking at and why. So when you use some of these terms, it's second nature. They're in the industry. Sure. So they have pushed the prices up a little bit, and the competitive nature of the industry strategics has done the same. I think that we're seeing a slightly less involvement now from private equity firms. Those who have gotten wind of it and taken a look, you've either chosen to play in the space or you haven't. Okay. And those who are continuing to play, they get it. They're understanding it. And those who have been a little nervous or bit by it, they've chosen to remain out.
Okay, so what about the franchise space? So in the intro, I was talking about Scott Whitaker and his Restoration One franchise in Spokane. He recently got some private equity backing.
Mhm.
And that was something that you and I talked about offline after that happened, that could potentially be a trend that we're seeing and a little bit more interest there. Is that still kind of what you're seeing?
It is, yeah. There's that's on two levels, Michelle. The most of the franchisees out there don't have anything to worry about. It's not going to affect them,
Yeah.
because they're simply not large enough. They're doing 1,000,000, 5,000,000, 8. They've got 6, 8, 10 employees, and they're just not a target. The higher echelons of the franchise world certainly are. And they're so well trained and such well-oiled machines, many of them, that they are targets, and they can become platforms for these private equity groups looking to get in. And on the second level, there are now a couple of equity groups looking at franchisors. They're so enthralled with the space, they're going to take it to the next level. And that's going to be interesting. It's going to change the dynamic of the franchise space in the upcoming years.
So what is it going to mean? And you don't have to get too far into the weeds on this, but what does it mean for the franchisor when PE is interested in a franchisee? Is that an interesting space for franchisors to have to navigate through?
It is, and they've typically never had to do it before. Their paperwork, their decision making, it's been all about the franchisee and their territory. Now they've had to take a step back, think about what it means to entertain outside big money, as we'll call it, and what it means for their future growth and how to prepare for that. So in the case of Restoration One, they did a great job taking their time, making decisions, and making them for the right reason. The team there was phenomenal to work with.
I believe that they do have a
Yeah.
leadership team. Yeah, they do. And Scott has big dreams, and I'm sure he's going to do big things. So,
Yes.
so where do you see things going the rest of 2023 in the market or into 2024? Are we going to continue and see all of this? What do you think? Have interest rates affected anything either?
Yeah, we'll start there. That's a great question. The interest rates, I know personally, I had to restructure a couple deals last year when we had 4 or 5 hikes in 6, 7 months, whatever the details were there. And I don't think I lost any deals, but a couple did have to be restructured. The cost of capital there drives some of these deals, of course. And so now they've seemingly leveled off, which is a good thing. And so I don't think we're going to see any more hikes, which is wonderful. When it comes to the trends in 23, I think we're going to see more of the same. I hate to be so vanilla with that answer, but there's still so many people looking to get in. And these, especially the industry strategics, they still have so many lines in the water. They're still out there hunting. You know, last year at RIA, you couldn't take 4 steps without being approached by somebody. It was some of my clients even referred to it as being offensive. They just couldn't even get to where they were going. There were so many people inquiring. So I hope it's not quite that bad this year. I wouldn't be surprised if it is. I know some equity groups that'll actually have booths there. I mean, that's how hard they're looking, is they've set up space. So I think it's going to be another good year for the industry, and I think it's going to carry into 24. You know, even if the economy decides to take a dip, that we don't know, this tentative economy, we don't know what we're in for, we're in a great space. And again, I feel blessed to be in it. It's been resistant so far, and fingers crossed it holds.
What's the number one question that you have contractors coming to you with in like today's marketplace overall?
They'll ask what the activity level is like. You know, a year ago, you couldn't open LinkedIn without an announcement.
No.
There were so many. We're getting 8 or 10 announcements a month, and that has backed way off. There were contractors that I appreciate them being smart about it. There was only a couple I worked with who just thought they could hang a shingle out, and all of a sudden it was going to be moths to a flame. And it isn't like that. It just isn't. You still have to be relatively clean. The trend should still be in the right direction. You still need to have your ducks in a row. People aren't just going to gobble you up to gobble you up. But the number one question has to do with the activity, what buyers are looking for, who the best buyers are. And there's a big difference in that last question. The best buyer on a small scale might be an SBA type buyer. It might be an industry partner. It might be the industry strategics. It might be private equity firm. And there's an array of possibilities within each one of those. And then we start talking about rolling over equity. One of the trends that I've seen in the last few years is business owners as a whole are not ready to just throw the towel in and walk away. You sell on a Friday and you're in the Bahamas by Tuesday. And this half step towards retirement is really a nice thing. So when an equity group or an industry strategic asks them to roll over 10, 15, 20% of equity, leave some skin in the game. Keep your job, but let's do what you enjoy. If you're a great sales manager or you're great at large loss or cat work, go do that. You don't have to be responsible for the day-to-day activity of the business anymore. So some sellers have said, this is great. I mean, now I get to do what I really want to do. I still have an upside. I've put a big check in my pocket. So it's a really nice way to sort of take a half step into retirement, especially if you're not sure about being ready for full retirement.
When there are so many possibilities of companies to sell to, how do you help sellers kind of go through the process of evaluating what buyer is best? Because I don't know that there's any, it's not like they're good or bad necessarily, but every company
Right.
is so different. So some are good fits and some are not good fits. It's more of a personal thing, right? Than that's just a bad company. So how do you walk them through that evaluation?
It starts with the numbers. It starts with the size of the company. If your business is throwing off $600,000 a year, that's a very different type of a buyer than if it's throwing off 2 million or 3 million. Okay. I've got several now that are pushing 3 and 4 million. That's a very different type of buyer than a smaller SBA buyer. So it starts there. And then I always tell my clients, my goal is to keep you in the driver's seat. What's important to you and your family? Is there going to be rollover equity? Do you want to keep working? If so, at what level? Does it have to be on site? I've sold several companies whose owners have now retired to another state, particularly Florida. And they're still in the business, but they're semi-retired working on their business from a distance. That's a wonderful combination. So there's nothing worse than having a seller in sort of a desperate position and they let the buyer jump into the bus and grab a hold of the wheel and they're no longer driving it. And so I go to great lengths to keep my clients' hands on the wheel. They're driving the bus and making the decisions.
How soon should owners have exit strategies? I won't even elaborate. Go ahead.
Well, it's a perfect question. And let me first define an exit strategy. People think it's this onerous, 6 month, 1 year, 2 year type process. It isn't. It's just not that complicated. When you get answers to 6 or 8 or 10 of your key questions, there is your exit strategy. Okay. There's the answers that will determine what that strategy is. Executing on it is what your team of professionals is there to help you with. The timing is all you. Okay. I always say, be prepared. Be prepared to sell, especially with all the activity in the marketplace. It's better for you. It's better for the business. So just being prepared has nothing to do with actually selling. But to answer your question simply, I always like calls 3 or 4 years in advance. And somehow they think that if they call me, they've got to sell, and they don't. I repeat myself now, that I'm not on that timing committee. I have nothing to do with it, nor will I ever push anyone to sell, with the exception of once or twice a year, I get a phone call from somebody that got a really challenging health diagnosis and they've got to sell. Yeah. And then it's how quickly can we get there and maximize what we can to pull out of it. Short of that, once you get 6, 8, 10 key answers, you've got a couple of advisors on board, and we start packaging you up confidentially to reach out in the marketplace. That whole process can take 2, 3, 4 years. And unfortunately, the thing I hear most often, once somebody calls me, Michelle, the flavor of it can sometimes be, I don't recognize the industry anymore. And a lot of times, I'm going to say this with a smile on my face, a lot of times these calls come in Friday afternoons when they're tired, they're burnt out, somebody quit, the check didn't show up, and they'll call me and the flavor is, I've had it, I don't recognize the industry, how quickly can you get me out of here? And by the way, can it be by next Tuesday? And that's the flavor, and it doesn't work that way. So then they'll turn around and say, I should have called you 2 or 3 years ago when I first thought about it. And there's no way I can back up from that. Yeah. I can provide answers, I can get the platform set, I can get you educated, but we've got to have them asking questions early. So I love it when somebody calls and says, don't know anything about the process, what questions should I be asking, how does it work? And then we just lay it out for them, and then the timing is all theirs.
going back to the topic of like what the market's looking like right now, you mentioned how in early 2022, it was like every day there were multiple press releases. It seemed like all these
Yeah.
announcements, but I've also always thought that we probably see one press release to maybe 10 acquisitions or transactions that have really happened. Do you think like there is so much more, how much more is happening that we don't actually know about or see?
Yeah, it's probably like an iceberg feature where you see the top 10% of it. Yeah, it's exactly right. It's all the small ones never get, they just fly under the radar. The typical $1.5 million, $2 million business doesn't get that kind of notoriety. The larger ones, everybody wants to post those and post their tombstones and what happened. And it's all big news, of course.
It is all big news.
Yeah.
What tips do you give? You don't have to give away all the bread and butter here, but for companies looking to increase their valuation or maybe thinking about selling, but knowing that they need to make some changes, what are the first changes that you recommend to companies who might want to sell, but know that they need to increase their valuation, make some internal changes?
Well, that question is sort of one that's real nebulous. It's for smaller companies, it's about clean books, getting an owner to wear 4 or 5 hats, not 15. The owner has to be able to be replaced. And so it's about the trend. It's about the lumpiness of sales. Let's say you've got a smaller company and they've got a, $800,000 job that accounts for 30% of the revenue in a year. Well, that's going to be tough. Last year and the year before, I got a dozen calls from Northern Texas when everybody froze there. Well, all of a sudden, these companies tripled in size for 6 months and they all wanted to sell. Well, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So it's about the basics on the smaller companies. For the larger companies, it's about proving the numbers, the revenue recognition, the WIP, ironing out all the WIP details, the quality of earnings, getting the numbers to reflect what we said they were. What I'm doing now is sell-side QE work to make sure the numbers are buttoned up. That stands for quality of earnings, by the way. We get them buttoned up and we go to market with really clean numbers, so there's no surprises. So it's about having a number 2 in place. If the owner's doesn't want to stick around for a year or 2 or 3 and roll over any equity, we've got to have a number 2 or 3 in place. So that target moves a little bit. But overall, it's making sure it's a nice, clean business, and there's 15 to 18 variables that will contribute to that.
Have you seen any deals run into hiccups because of the labor shortage and people having problems finding enough people to even keep their bench staffed while they're selling?
Not really. It's a great question because we're all in the same boat. Finding labor has been really tough. Now, you've probably heard this. The general flavor out there is there's more qualified people applying. And showing up, by the way, not just applying, but actually showing up to interviews. And as construction has slowed down a little bit, some of these skilled tradesmen have come back to the restoration industry. So the flavor is that this labor shortage is ending. We're on the downhill side of it. And that's a big bonus. I think we're going to get back to some really high quality labor here in the next year or 2.
That would be fabulous.
Yeah.
Ending on a high note, maybe. Okay.
That's right.
Anything else that you want to add that we haven't talked about? We covered a lot here. So anything else you want to add?
No, the only thing I'll add is just, if you're within 3 to 5 years, just ask the right questions of any advisor. Make sure that you've got the key nuggets of information. It's not worth driving to work every day or having your head hit the pillow with the big question marks. The answers are too easy to get. And your confidence and peace of mind will thank you. How's that?
Perfect. All right. So for anybody listening or watching, you can find more of JT at exitstrategies360.com. You can also find his micro columns on CNR and other great content there. So JT, thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Much appreciated. Thanks, Michelle. Take care.
For more Restoration Today and the latest news, visit our website, cnrmagazine.com, and find the latest episodes of the Restoration Today podcast on your favorite podcasting platform.